morning, Peter Goertz. I'm a psychiatrist. What can you do if your loved one is a danger to themselves or others? This can be a very stressful situation for family members of people who are troubled psychiatrically. And there's an acute part, but also a chronic part. This can be a years or decades long struggle. So I'm talking about family members or loved ones who might be suicidal, homicidal, violent, potentially even autistic and violent or demented and violent, not eating, lying in feces, people who may repeatedly overdose with heroin, potentially intentionally sometimes, or in a gray area, not really caring if they survive or not. So a lot of scenarios where loved ones might be in danger or dangerous to others. And what do the family members or people close to them do? What can they do? And often the troubled people don't want help. So that's another very difficult aspect. So ideally, if you can, let's say as an example, convince your husband to let you drive him to the emergency room if he's suicidal, that's the best way to go. Keep it voluntary as much as possible. And another aspect is you want to do your best to make sure that you yourself are safe. And if you need to leave the house, let's say your boyfriend is agitated, threatening you, has a gun, you want to really, like they say in the airplane, you want to put on your own oxygen before you put it on a child, for example. You want to really make sure you yourself are safe. So that's one key aspect initially, if there's any danger to you. If necessary, if it's an issue, remove guns from the house, protect children, protect animals, take away car keys if necessary. Now, if someone is very troubled, you can call the police, so they might come and do a welfare check, but they may not take the troubled person with them to the emergency room or to jail if necessary. They may leave the person at home if the person does not seem obviously disturbed. So if you call, let's say, and say your brother's homicidal, he's threatening to kill you, but when the police get there, they find your brother totally calm, cooperative, coherent thinking. They may not do anything. They may not take your brother to a hospital or to a jail. Now, one aspect to look at is if you've been hurt, let's say beaten or otherwise abused, you can press charges if there's a criminal aspect to it. So if you're being beaten, for example, you have the option of pressing charges, but even then, the person may not be incarcerated for any length of time. They may be arrested briefly, maybe for a few hours in jail, but then they may be let go, let's say if they can pay money in order not to be held in jail. Another aspect to think about is you can get, in my state where I practice, you can get what we call an order of protection. In general, you can get an order of protection. Let's say if you want to go to court and you want to make sure the person who's been threatening you does not harm you in any way or harm your children, you can go to court and get an order of protection. In my state, what you can do if you feel a person is dangerous to themselves or others or unable to care for themselves, like I said, not eating, maybe lying in feces, you can go to the coroner's office and get what we call an order of protection, not an order of protection, order of protective custody. And if they go through with that order, if they do all the paperwork, then the person will be picked up and taken to an emergency room for an evaluation. Now, even then, that does not necessarily mean they're going to be sent to a psychiatric hospital or even treated at all psychiatrically. It's just the order of protective custody is just ensuring that the person gets taken to an emergency room for an evaluation. And you definitely want to be available. Please answer your phone if the person is taken to a hospital, because that can be crucial for a doctor to call you and get additional information. That, for me, has been often crucial in trying to decide if someone's dangerous or not. So we get a little information from the person, or as much as possible from the person who's brought to the emergency room, but then often it's very important to get additional information from others, and that definitely can change our decision, what we think is best for the patient. So hospitalization or not is a major decision that we need to make. Now, another side of that issue is, and this, I had a situation recently that an OPC, so an order of protective custody, was filed and a family member had initiated that. But it turns out, as best I could tell, I read what was on the order of protective custody. The person did not want me to call, the patient in the emergency room did not want me to call the person who had initiated that order of protective custody. So I did not additionally get more information from them, but I read what was on the order of protective custody. I called other people who knew the patient, and the patient was agreeable to me calling those people who knew the patient. And ultimately, it turned out, as best I could tell, that what was written in the order of protective custody was not adequate and was maybe not truthful, was not necessarily correct information. So I did not feel the information I had was adequate to justify the patient being sent to a psychiatric hospital. So potentially, if someone, let's say, for financial reasons, wants their wife to be gone for a while and wants to, take all the belongings and leave and clean out the bank account, they may put in an order of protective, or initiate an order of protective custody and say things that are not true. So we really want to be careful as psychiatrists and doctors in general in trying to make a clear distinction which order of protective custody paperwork is valid and which order of protective custody is not valid. So different cases can be very different. Sometimes, in my experience, the information on the order of protective custody may not be correct, may be false, and may have been done, let's say, in order to try to have financial gain. So we really want to be careful. But in my experience, the majority of orders of protective custody tend to be valid from what I can glean. So let's say we feel the order of protective custody is valid, the patient ends up in a psychiatric hospital. That may not be for very long, and they're going to be discharged, and they may even go back home then to live with the same family member who initiated the order of protective custody. And it's key in general for the patient to have ongoing treatment, ongoing psychiatric treatment, which often, unfortunately, does not happen. So it can be a repeated challenge for family members that their loved ones become unstable psychiatrically, represent a danger to themselves or others. And the solution, it can be very difficult to find a good solution, because in the long run, it can be very difficult to keep patients in treatment, psychiatric treatment, if they don't really want that, if they're not motivated, or if they're in fact totally against it. Now, Another aspect that I ran into recently is our medical system, of course, is not perfect, to put it mildly. So there was a patient who became physically ill, at least in part because the patient could not afford his medications. So that's another aspect of our healthcare system here, which can be very challenging. So in the long run, with a family member or a loved one who has psychiatric issues and does not really want treatment, does not stay in treatment, that can be very challenging for the family and potentially can lead to burnout of family members. Another aspect to think of is if a patient does not appear psychiatrically stable enough to make coherent, good decisions, wise decisions for themselves, health-wise, medically, or psychiatrically, then it's good to for the family to initiate what we call getting a medical power of attorney. So they would go to an attorney, have the paperwork drawn up, and then if the patient is agreeable, be able to make decisions for the patient in situations or at times where the patient is not able to make wise decisions for themselves. Thank you very much.